The rain fell in sheets that night, cold as judgment, soaking through the threadbare cloak wrapped tightly around the girl's trembling frame. Her bare feet sank into the mud at the forest's edge, toes numb, ankles scratched from the gravel path they'd forced her down. Behind her, a sea of torchlight burned. Dozens of villagers stood in a crooked line, silent and stone-faced, their flickering flames painting warped shadows across the night. Their eyes, hard and hollow, were fixed on her as though she were already gone. And maybe she was. Alara stood motionless, spine straight, jaw clenched, 17 winters old and banished like a dog. The flames behind her hissed in the downpour, casting an eerie orange halo around the silhouette of the town she once called home. Before her lay the ancient woods, Black Hollow, untouched, forbidden, alive with old whispers and older dangers. The forest did not move, but it waited. Clutched tightly in her hand was an old bronze locket, dulled by time and caked with dried mud from the day they'd torn it from her neck, only for her to steal it back that morning. It was the only thing she had left of her mother, the same woman they had tied to a stake and set ablaze 15 years ago, accusing her of witchcraft. Her name, Leora, was never spoken now, not in daylight, not in prayer. They saw Leora in Ilara's face, the same wild eyes, the same soft defiance. And tonight, they decided that was enough. A gust of wind stirred the trees ahead, and with it came a sound, soft, almost gentle. It wasn't the leaves rustling. It wasn't thunder. It was a voice, quiet and ancient, carried through the branches like a secret. It whispered her name, Alara. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up. The forest was no longer silent. Behind her, the crowd turned away as one, backs sharp, judgments final. The torches began to move, flickering down the path, disappearing into the darkened outline of the village. No one looked back. No one said goodbye. Alara was alone. And then, just as the last light vanished, a sound ripped through the air, piercing and raw. A howl, long and broken, rose from the depths of Black Hollow. But it wasn't a wolf. It wasn't any animal Alara had ever known. It was something else, something waking. They called her a witch, but they had no idea what she really was. Until midnight came. Grendale was a village that feared its own stories. Tucked between rolling hills and the looming shadow of Black Hollow Forest, the village looked ordinary enough. Rows of weathered, thatch-roofed cottages, crooked cobblestone paths, and the smell of bread and ash forever floating through the air. But beneath its quaint exterior pulsed something older. Fear, passed down from lips to ears across generations. Every elder carried it. Every child learned it before their first step. And at the center of every whispered warning, every bedtime tale meant to scare obedience into little hearts, was her mother, Leora, the Witch of Black Hollow. They never said her name now. Just her. Just the cursed one. The woman who turned milk sour, who made the river run red, who laughed when the lightning struck. 15 years ago, the villagers had dragged her through the square, screaming about spells and sin, and bound her to the stake in the field. They set fire to her, as Alara, barely 2, cried from a basket beneath the chapel steps. No one touched the child for days. They had hoped, perhaps, the flames would take her too. But Alara lived, and that frightened them more. Now 17, Alara moved through Grendale like a ghost, always present, never touched. She worked odd chores for copper coins, lived on the edge of the village with her bitter old aunt, and avoided eye contact like it might get her killed. The other girls turned their backs when she passed. The boys whispered curses and made signs of protection. Children tossed pebbles at her shadow and dared each other to follow her down the path home. Yet, for all their hate, she did no harm. Elara was quiet, kind, careful, but always watching. She watched the birds when they circled her house 3 times at dusk, though no one else seemed to see them. She noticed how candles flickered wildly when she entered a room. No wind, no open window. She felt heat rise in her palms when anger burned too long, and sometimes, when the night was very still, animals would approach her in the dark. A fox once sat beside her at the edge of a stream. A crow left feathers at her doorstep for a week. It was as if the wild recognized something in her, something even she didn't understand. Her dreams were the worst, not nightmares, visions. She'd wake with words in her mouth she didn't know the meaning of, symbols etched into her memory. And always, always, the forest, its roots, its breath, its voice calling her name like a lullaby laced with danger. She tried to push it all down, to silence the noise, to pretend, because more than anything, Elara wanted what she'd never had, to belong. She wanted to laugh with the other girls at the well, to walk through the square without eyes burning her back. She longed to sit in the chapel and not feel the weight of 1,000 unsaid prayers keeping her outside its doors. But deep inside her, past the ache for normalcy, lived another hunger. Sharper, darker. She wanted the truth. Who was her mother really? What had they done to her? And was Elara destined to follow the same path? The village watched her like a storm waiting to happen. They believed she would become her mother, and sometimes, on the bad days, Elara believed it too. So she stayed silent, because if she spoke, if she let even a sliver of the truth slip from her lips, she knew what they'd do. They'd burn her too. Life in Grendale didn't try to kill Elara. It simply refused to let her live. Each morning began with silence. No greetings, no smiles. Just the thud of her boots against dirt and the cold sting of eyes that wouldn't meet hers. At the market, the baker would sell her stale bread wrapped in old cloth, careful never to touch her hand. Mothers pulled children closer when she passed, whispering prayers under their breath. She could still hear the taunts of the younger boys from the day before, witch seed, hell-born, forest girl, slung like stones behind her back. She lived in a crooked little cottage near the edge of the forest, where the last fence post of Grendale met the first root of Black Hollow. Most called it the Cursed Edge. Her aunt, Mara, had agreed to raise her only because no one else would. A woman of sharp elbows and sharper words, Mara made it no secret that Elara's presence was a burden, not a blessing. She kept her busy with chores, splitting wood, washing laundry in the icy stream, collecting herbs from the hill. And when Elara faltered, there were no gentle corrections, only scorn. "Your mother should have taken you with her," Mara muttered once, not knowing Elara had heard. The house was small, drafty, and smelled of dried sage and damp stone. But it held one secret, a hiding place under the floorboards of Elara's tiny room. There, wrapped in old linen, lay the journals, her mother's, bound in leather, scrawled in ink that shimmered oddly when held to the light. They weren't diaries of love or loss. They were filled with dreams, strange visions, symbols, maps of stars that didn't match the skies above Grendale, spells written in tongues no longer spoken, warnings and invitations. Elara had read them in secret for years, piecing together fragments of a world she'd never been taught, a power she feared to name. She didn't understand most of it, but one line was etched into her memory, burned like fire across the page. "What they call witchcraft is only what they fear in women who remember who they are." She had tried to forget it, but forgetting became harder by the day. It happened one afternoon near the woodpile. A blackbird, its wing twisted, lay gasping in the dirt. Elara approached, instinct tugging at her even as her chest tightened. She reached down, fingertips trembling, and gently touched its chest. Something passed between them, warm, invisible, electric. A heartbeat, not her own, pulsed through her palm. And then, without warning, the bird fluttered upright, flapped its wings twice, and soared into the air like it had never been broken. Alara staggered back, eyes wide, breath frozen. She stared at her hands as if they were no longer hers. Then, trembling, she grabbed a nearby shovel and buried the spot where the bird had lain. She didn't speak of it, didn't write it down. That night, she bolted the windows and lit every candle she could find. She didn't sleep. Not really. But just before dawn, when the flames had turned low and the shadows grew long, she slipped into something deeper than dreaming. Her mother stood before her, Leora, not in flames, not screaming, but calm, radiant, eyes like hers, voice like water on stone. "You are not cursed, Alara," she said, stepping into the candlelight. "You are chosen." Alara tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her mother reached for her hand and placed something inside, soft, glowing. A seed? A flame? "When the forest calls," Leora whispered, "don't be afraid to answer." And then the dream was gone. Alara woke gasping, her sheets damp, her skin hot to the touch. The candles had melted into pools of wax. One burned still, though she had not lit it. She lay there in the silence, heart pounding, a question rising like smoke in her chest. What if everything they feared about her was true? It was on the 4th day of the thaw when the stranger arrived in Grendale. He came just as the snow began to recede into mist and the mud roads thickened with spring's breath. His cart was lined with bottles of glowing tinctures, satchels of herbs wrapped in crimson twine, charms shaped like crescent moons and wolves' teeth. No one had seen him before. No one knew his name, but he smiled like someone who had walked every road in the world and survived them all. "Mael," he told the villagers, voice low and lyrical, a simple wanderer with wares for the weary. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, flicked over the townspeople with quiet amusement. They were wary, of course. Outsiders weren't welcome in Grendale, but curiosity was louder than caution that week. The healer had fallen ill, the crops hadn't taken root, and the baker's child was coughing blood. So they came, one by one, to his cart, and Mull gave them powders to burn, salves to rub, seeds to plant under moonlight. He asked for no coin, only stories. Alara watched from the edge of the square, half hidden behind the well. She didn't know what made her approach. Maybe it was the way the light bent strangely around his cart, or how his voice seemed to carry across the wind, or maybe it was the way his gaze had found her before she even moved. "You," he said softly when she stepped closer. "You have your mother's eyes, and her fire." Her blood turned to ice. Mael leaned in then, his voice lower. "Don't be afraid, Alara. I mean no harm." "How do you know my name?" she asked. "I know many names," he said, placing a small pendant into her hand, a smooth black stone carved with a spiral, strung on silver wire, for protection or revelation. Sometimes they're the same. She held it tightly. It hummed, subtly, deeply, like a heartbeat waiting to be remembered. From that day, something shifted. Alara felt it first in her chest, then in her spine, then in her fingers. A warmth that came when she concentrated too hard, a pulse that danced at the edge of her senses. She started testing, small at first. A candle, flickering under her stare until it bent toward her like a flower to sunlight. A rabbit with a twisted paw. She touched it, whispered a word from her mother's journal, and the creature bounded away whole. The air listened when she spoke. The wind responded to her name, and for the first time, she didn't shrink from her reflection in the stream. She saw someone else there, someone unafraid. But hope is a dangerous seed in cursed soil. It was only a week after Milo's arrival that the wheat in the south fields turned black overnight, collapsing in on itself like rotted lungs. Then the village well ran dry, its water reeking of sulfur. Chickens stopped laying. The butcher's dog howled at invisible things. Fear grew faster than spring. They whispered again. The same words they used to whisper about her mother now turned on her. Eyes followed her more sharply. Conversation stopped when she entered the square. Even Aunt Mara started locking the doors tighter at night. Then came the scream. It was just before dawn. A woman, frenzied and barefoot, burst into the chapel square yelling, "She was floating above her house at midnight. I saw her." Elara woke to pounding at the door, her heart already racing. She didn't remember floating, but she did remember the dream. She had been flying above the trees, the moon in her hands. It began, as it always did, with a whisper. This time, it came from the blacksmith's wife, tear-streaked and frantic. Her child lay pale and fevered, unmoving for days. No medicine worked. No prayer brought relief. When desperation outpaced reason, the mother turned her fear toward the easiest target. "She cursed him," she cried in the square. "I saw her. Her eyes burned when she passed by our door." The crowd stirred, hungry for someone to blame. That night, the council gathered in the chapel, 5 old men and 2 women, none of whom had looked Elara in the eye in years. The villagers surrounded the building, torches in hand, waiting for blood or justice, whichever came first. Elara stood at the back of the hall, wrists bound in rope, her face lit only by the flickering altar flame. Mile tried to speak in her defense. "You know nothing of the old ways," he said, stepping into the center. "If this girl bears power, it's not the cursed kind. It's the kind that could heal your fields, your children, your very souls." "She is her mother's daughter," spat Elder Kern, slamming a hand on the pulpit. "And you remember what her mother did." "She healed," Male snapped, "until you burned her for it." The room erupted. Shouts, cries, the clamor of fear wrapped in righteousness. Then Elara spoke. Her voice, clear as morning frost, cut through the noise. "No," she said. "I won't run." Mile turned sharply toward her. "Elara, I want them to hear me." She stepped forward, rope dragging behind her. Her eyes glowed, not with magic, but with truth, with something unshakable, something ancient. "I am not afraid," she said. "You should be." Silence followed. Cold, thick, paralyzed silence. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, the sentence. "Exile," the council declared. "If the forest takes her, so be it. If not, may the gods have mercy on us." But mercy was not something Grendel knew well. They branded her at twilight, just above the collarbone, a crescent mark, glowing faintly as her skin seared, a punishment wrapped in superstition. Aunt Mara turned away as they dragged her toward the tree line. Not a word, not even a glance. They tied her hands with hempen rope and pushed her to the edge of Black Hollow. "By dawn," one of the councilmen muttered, "you'll be nothing but bones." Then they turned and walked away, torches bobbing like fireflies disappearing into the night. She stood there, alone again. The forest groaned around her. Mist crept in like breath from the earth. Owls fell silent. The pendant Mael had given her, tucked into her sleeve, pulsed like a second heartbeat. And then, the light. A flicker at first, deep among the trees. Then a surge. A flame, not red, but blue. Ethereal. Unnatural. Beautiful. The trees seemed to bend toward her. The mist parted like a curtain. The forest had answered. The forest swallowed her whole. The mist thickened behind Alara as if it had been waiting, closing off the world she once knew with a breathless hush. Her footsteps were the only sound in that endless green, where shadows moved on their own and the wind whispered not in words, but warnings. She walked until her feet bled. Her body trembled with hunger. Her skin scraped raw from brambles. Days passed, or maybe hours. Time unraveled in Black Hollow. The trees watched, the roots shifted, faces flickered in bark and branches, gone the instant she blinked. Her pendant glowed feverishly now, pulsing hotter as she stumbled deeper, as if guiding her, or baiting something else. At night, the visions came. She saw her mother burning again, screaming her name, though Alara had been only 2. In another dream, her mother stood in the woods, drenched in moonlight, speaking in a tongue Alara didn't understand. Spirits hovered behind her, their faces pale and endless. When Alara tried to speak, blood poured from her mouth instead. She woke sobbing, clawing at the dirt. Nothing she tried worked. Her power flared without warning, once lighting an entire glade on fire just by crying. Another time, it froze a stream solid. But it hurt now. Each use carved into her. Like the magic itself was trying to escape her skin, she stopped trying. And one night, broken and cold, she looked up at the sky and screamed, "Why did you choose me? I never wanted this." The trees offered no answer. The pendant pulsed once, dimmer now, like even it had grown tired of her. That's when he appeared. Miles stepped out from between 2 trees like he'd always been there, like the forest opened for him. He was dry, calm. His cloak didn't carry a speck of dirt. Relief surged in Alara's chest so hard it made her knees buckle. "Mael," she gasped, staggering toward him. "You found me. I thought I was—" But he didn't catch her. He didn't even move. His eyes weren't kind anymore. "You weren't hard to find," he said flatly. "You wear that pendant like a beacon. That's why I gave it to you." Her breath caught. "What?" He circled her slowly, like a predator. "You're strong. Stronger than your mother ever was. I hoped it would pass to you. And it did." "You knew her," Alara whispered, her throat tightening. He smiled, but it wasn't kindness. Intimately. She trusted me, loved me maybe, until she realized what I wanted. "She said you betrayed her." Alara took a step back. "I did." He said it with no shame, no hesitation. "I told the council where she met the spirits, what rites she practiced. I let them believe it was her fault their cows died, and their daughters fell sick. And when they tied her to the pyre, I watched." "Why?" Alara's voice cracked. "She didn't hurt anyone." "She refused to give it to me," he hissed. "The gate, the bloodline, the key." Alara's heartbeat roared in her ears. "What gate?" "The one that opens at midnight," Mael said, stepping closer. "Every 100 years. A crossing between worlds, between this and the realm your kind comes from. She was the key once. Now you are." He drew the blade from beneath his cloak. It shimmered, dark as midnight, obsidian rimmed in ash, pulsing with symbols that writhed like worms. "No, Mael." Alara turned to run, but he was too fast. The blade sank into her side, not deep, but enough. Enough for her to scream, enough for blood to fall, enough to mark the ground. Mael leaned in, whispering against her ear as her knees gave out. "Midnight is almost here, and only your blood can open the gate." Alara lay curled on the forest floor, cheek pressed to damp soil, breath shallow and quick. Blood seeped between her fingers, hot and thick, staining the earth like a signature she never meant to sign. The trees spun above her, blurring, warping. Her vision dimmed, her limbs heavy. In her chest, the pendant beat erratically like a second heart convulsing with panic. She was dying. A cruel end. Not at the hands of the village, but of the one man she trusted, the one who had looked at her like she mattered. Tears slipped from her eyes, silent and bitter. I never asked for this, she whispered to the leaves. Then, light. The pendant flared suddenly, searing with warmth. Her fingers twitched. The locket, her mother's locket, burst open, and through the blinding golden glow, a voice emerged. Alara, software steady, unmistakable, her mother, but not the voice from her dreams, no whisper of doom or warning. This voice carried no fear. It held the strength of stone and the warmth of sunlight through a window. You are more than power, it said. You are purpose. Alara's breath caught. The world slowed. The trees stood still. Even her pain paused, held in suspension like time itself had bent to listen. Images poured through her mind like a forgotten memory flooding in. Her mother standing beneath a midnight moon, hands glowing not with sorcery but healing. Children cradled in her arms. A deer wounded and made whole. Spirits bowing, not as demons, but as ancient guardians. She had never been a witch. She had been a keeper, a balance holder, a protector of the threshold between worlds. And Alara was born to continue that purpose. The fear, the rejection, the exile, it was never about what she was, but what they didn't understand. And Mael wanted to tear that balance apart. Something deep inside her stirred, a wellspring she had always feared to touch. Magic surged, not wild, but centered, not burning, but warm. With trembling hands, Alara reached down and gripped the obsidian blade lodged in her side. Her scream echoed through the trees as she tore it free, blood flowing freely now, but she didn't stop. She pressed the wound, stood, staggered, alive with purpose. The ground beneath her feet thrummed. She could feel it now, the pull, a current. It wasn't death calling. It was the gate, the crossing, the boundary her mother once held sealed. Maciel had built the altar not far. She could see it between the trees now, rising from stone and vine like a wound in the forest's heart. Symbols glowed in the earth around it. The air rippled, cracking, peeling like skin too tight. The gate was opening. Alara limped toward it, one hand to her wound, the other outstretched like a compass, guided not by stars but by bloodline. The forest parted before her, and this time it did not whisper fear. It whispered welcome. And Mael, waiting at the altar, turned at the sound of her steps, his eyes narrowing. She was not broken. She was becoming. The forest roared. Wind tore through the trees like a beast unchained. Branches cracked. Leaves spiraled in fury, and shadows, long clawed, screaming, peeled themselves from the ground. The gate pulsed at the heart of it all, a jagged tear in the world, leaking violet light and whispering voices too old for human ears. It wasn't open fully yet, but it was close. Alara stood at the edge of the altar's circle, her hair whipping around her face, blood still dripping down her side. Her hands glowed with heat and memory. Fire danced in her palms, not wild, but alive, curved to her will. The symbols beneath her feet shimmered as if recognizing her now, accepting her as their true bearer. Mael raised his arms within the circle, his cloak shredded, face lit by the gate's unholy gleam. "You're too late," he roared above the chaos. "This is what your blood was born for. It can't be stopped." "Not by you," Alara said, her voice steady, cutting through the storm. "But I was never meant to be just blood." He sneered. "You don't even know what you are." "I do now." The words from her mother's journal spilled from her lips, ancient syllables that tasted like iron and light. The ground trembled. The gate sputtered. flickering with resistance. Mael's eyes widened. Where did you learn? Elira Van Tasharan, Morasir Talon. Her voice deepened with each line, the forest answering her. Light poured from her chest, from her hands, from the very earth beneath her feet. Mael screamed and summoned his army. Spirits burst from the trees, howling things with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. They surged at Alara, but the fire in her palms flared wide, pushing them back with searing light. She saw their true forms, fragments of pain, lost and weaponized by Mael's hunger. They weren't evil. They were broken. She whispered a word her mother once wrote in the margin of her journal, peace. And the spirits paused, faded, released. Mael was alone now, the gate flickering behind him. And then came the final blow, the truth. You've grown strong, he said, lowering his arms, sweat pouring from his brow. Stronger than I imagined. Why? Alara asked. Why did you betray her? Why did you use me? He hesitated, and for the first time the mask cracked. I loved her, he said, but I feared what she could become. What you could become. They were going to take you from us. I thought if I gave them her, they'd let you live. I was wrong, but by then, the power, his voice broke, it had me. Alara's breath caught. No, she whispered. He stepped closer. The blade now dropped at his side. I only wanted to keep you safe. You let her burn. I had to choose. You chose fear. Silence fell between them, the forest waiting. The gate shimmered wider, reaching out. She could destroy him now. She could speak one word and reduce him to ash. Fire curled around her fists, aching for release. But then she remembered her mother's voice, soft and steady. Your purpose. And Elara knew. She stepped forward, lifting the locket from around her neck. The same one her mother once wore. The same one Mal gave to her mother long before the world crumbled between them. She pressed it into his hand. You loved her once, she said. That's all I need to remember. And then she turned. She faced the gate, raised her arms, and spoke the final seal. Telenarai, Vesa Threnmore. The light exploded outward, blinding, golden, pure. The gate shuddered, screamed, and collapsed. The shockwave sent Mal flying, his body crumbling midair. Ash scattered where he once stood, taken not in rage but in resolution. The forest fell quiet. The light faded, and Alara stood alone, alive, whole, and no longer afraid. Morning broke gently over the village of Grendale. Mist curled along the cobblestones like memory made visible, and the once wild wind now whispered like a lullaby. The forest, battered but whole, stood in sacred silence, as though it too were breathing out after a long-held pain. And from the tree line, she came. Elara. Blood crusted her tunic. Her skin bore the stories of the night, slashes, bruises, a wound on her side hastily wrapped in moss and linen. But her back was straight, her gaze steady, and her eyes glowed faintly as though they had looked into the very soul of the earth and survived it. She didn't walk fast. She didn't need to. The village was already gathering. Doors opened. Faces peeked from behind windows and curtains, first in disbelief, then awe. No one spoke. No one dared. Until a child stepped forward, the same one who had once thrown stones at her gate, and dropped to their knees. Others followed. One by one, they knelt. Not in fear, but in reverence. Alara stopped in the village square, the same one where she had been mocked, voted upon, condemned. She looked at them, at the faces that once turned away, twisted in suspicion. Now they looked up with something else. Uncertainty, yes, but hope too. And she did not turn away. I was never what you feared, she said, voice carrying like a soft drumbeat in still air. But I am what you needed. No one moved. I won't curse you, she continued. I won't run. I will teach you. She stepped forward, pulled a book from beneath her cloak. Her mother's journal, now bound in new leather, worn from her hands. This is our history, all of it. You will know it. And so she stayed. Alara did not burn the village. She lit it. In the weeks that followed, she taught them the old ways, not spells of destruction, but the language of trees, the healing of roots, the songs the stars remembered. She healed wounds, blessed harvests, sang stories to children by the fire, stories not of witches, but of guardians. And they came to call her the Witch Queen, not in mockery, in honor. She rebuilt her mother's home at the edge of the forest, not as a shack, but as a sanctuary, a place for the sick, the curious, the lost. People came from far beyond Grendel to be healed, to learn, to remember. And each year, on the night of her exile, when the moon sat high and the wind hushed in anticipation, the forest glowed blue, not in fear, in remembrance. They gathered at the edge, candles in hand, and listened as Alara spoke, of balance, of truth, of what it means to be feared, and still choose to forgive. They told her she was a witch, and in a way, they were right. But not the way they feared. She was fire and healing, wild and gentle all at once. Shadow and light, darkness and dawn intertwined. If you've ever been told you're too much, too strange, too different, too impossible, maybe, just maybe, you're the kind of magic the world needs. So tell me, have you ever felt like Alara, misunderstood, judged, or feared simply for being yourself? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. And if this story touched you, subscribe for more tales that remind us all how powerful being different truly is. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs to remember their own magic. Because sometimes the greatest power lies not in hiding who we are, but in standing boldly with all our fire and light.